All right, guys, welcome back. Special guest today.
I'm Malcom, international man of mystery, NMNT training, and just generally hang out in the self-defense community to hopefully support.
So Malcolm and I did a lot of work with the Chiron Trading Group, with Rory Miller, Tammy McCracken. Had a lot of really cool, in-depth conversations about the ideas of self-defense, life enhancement, where people get it right, where people get it wrong. I'm not sure which one of those we talked about more. Probably mostly the wrong.
Mostly the wrong.
Mostly the wrong. Because it's easier to talk about the wrong.
Yeah, the wrong. And the wrong is funnier.
It is.
Right? It's like very serious, kind of heavy.
Yeah. So, thought we'd have a conversation today about... the first time I ever heard this term used in this particular, certainly the concept I'd heard talked about before, but the term code switching, you were the first person I heard use it, and you walked it out a certain way, and I thought it'd be kind of cool for us to talk about. It's a thing we all do all the time.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily do it consciously, and in my mind, the better you get at doing it consciously, the better you get at some of the other stuff, which is a talk we'll probably have later.
Yeah.
Some of the other stuff in self-defense that is not putting damage into the other person. So you want to walk out the idea?
Yeah, it's a really simple one, and chances are, if you are a fully functional human being, you do it. This is, you don't, hopefully, the way you talk to your mom is not the way that you talk to your friend, is not the way that you talk to the elderly homeless person that you meet on the street.
Right.
And the idea is that you have different bands of communication styles, word choices, rate, tone, pitch, and volume of your voice, body language, proxemics, all of that changes depending on who you're talking to, right? So you have like your good friends range where you guys know each other, you're comfortable with each other, you're probably a little bit closer. If you don't know each other, you might be further away. This is culturally dependent too, but it's the idea that you are going to interact differently with different types of people. And what those interactions are like determines a lot of how the relationships with those people go. Whether they're 2-second relationships because you're walking past each other on the train, or they are years-long relationships because that's your cousin. And so what's important for code switching in terms of its application for self-protection, at least in my mind, and you tell me what you think as well, you have to have a code for people who are potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
And having that code and having that way to interact with those people facilitates stuff like de-escalation, for example, that Paul's doing a class on in a little bit. It makes it easier if you have a mode of operation that you are used to stepping into for managing people who could potentially be dangerous to you.
Yep.
And whether that's the creepy uncle or the mugger in the alley with the knife is going to change to some degree, but a general wing of your life where you recognize occasionally I deal with people that I can't quite trust, and that code can help you identify what they're doing, what bucket you fit into for them. So you need to understand what bucket they fit into for you and what bucket you fit into for them, because that will help you manage those interactions much more safely, much more effectively, and you'll be able to recognize and counter some of the interview processes that go on before an actual attack. For context, the interview is the process by which a predator identifies whether or not you're good prey. So if you can recognize what they're doing and code switch into a version of yourself that only exists to deal with these potentially dangerous situations and is much more cognizant of interview dynamics, chances are you won't even have a story to tell. It'll be that one time that creepy person walked up, they recognized from your body language and the way that you adjusted and the fact that you stepped back at an angle, adopted your ready stance, and the way that you looked at them, that you were a bad victim, and they kept it moving.
Yeah. So for context, Malcolm came to class here at the Metro Academy and played today.
It's fun.
We try to make it fun. And then we went and had lunch with one of my black belts, and we had some very high level conversations, and I almost wish we had a recorder going because some of the conversations touched upon a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
Asking you, so one of the things I tell people is here on a Saturday morning, we go from our youngest students, 4 to 6, to our next youngest, which is 7 to 10, 11 to 14, and then adult class. If you were to sit as a fly on the wall over the course of that time period, the tone, language, speed, and context rapidly changes. Even if back in the day, I taught all of those classes. And I would rapidly take off this hat, put on this hat, and now I'm a kids instructor, and now I'm a juniors instructor. Now, and once in a while I'd even apologize if any of the parents here in class had their youngling waiting on the side, be like, just a warning, they're gonna hear adult language during the adult class, because I think that's actually important. It's how we talk in real life. And of course the parents were always like, yeah, they hear in the car, don't worry about it, right? So for you, in your many different roles, I would imagine you've had the smile right there. So I'm doing this whole reading up on micro expressions recently. Malcolm just flashed a funny one, like 3 to 5 memories just crossed his mind of having to rapidly change and do some code switching, I'm guessing. Do you want to walk out without incriminating yourself or others?
What would I ever do that would be
You've worked in education.
Incrimination?
You've worked in education in some
of course,
questionable places.
And so for me, so I would say I've worked in some challenging environments that had a lot of beauty and a lot of unique opportunity to work with kids who really needed help.
Can we say where, or is that a...
I'll leave that out. So the thing that really was important for code switching for me was being able to bridge the gap between, for example, in education, where the kids are and where the bureaucracy is. And those worlds don't really touch each other very often in a way where there's mutual understanding. So a lot of times the kids don't understand the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy definitely doesn't understand the kids.
Despite the fact that you're spending 7 hours a day with each other.
Yeah, but I mean, you could spend 70 years with each other, and still, if you're not looking to understand fully, you're not going to understand very well. Now, with that said, I think the code switching was important to me because I had to be able to communicate in a way that the kids would understand and that they would be able to easily feel a degree of rapport. We might have some similarities, we might have no similarities, but let me see if I can have my body language be open and positive while still presenting as an authority figure. And that was everything from shoelaces all the way to haircut, from how I stand, whom I talk to, when I talk to them, how close I let them stand to me. And there's all kinds of machinations. But the punchline was, I had a profile that I needed to present, which was sincerely part of my personality, right? Everybody has a whole bunch of facets of their personality. If you think you don't, you think you're the same person all the time, have somebody wake you up at 4 a.m. and let's see if you keep that same energy. You probably won't. But I needed a version. So I created essentially a Rivers character. Rivers character was who I was at work. And there was like Rivers kid version, Rivers bureaucracy version, and my cadence changed, my vocal tone changed, everything changed in order to serve that particular goal. And both of them are me.
Right.
It's not like it's different people. I'm not imitating anybody. And it got to the point where it was natural. But the important part for our purposes is figuring out, how can I practice this? How can I be my best self for this situation? If you have a job, you've done this because you've gone into your boss's office. If you still got the job, I promise you did it. You've gone into your boss's office, and chances are your upper spinal body language shifts just a little bit, and maybe your vocal tone shifts, and your voice goes up an octave or two, and suddenly you don't feel like the dominant person in the interaction. And so all of that is normal, and we do it without thinking about it. The part that's valuable for us is we can do it while thinking about it. So I can practice. And we talked about life enhancement briefly, right? I can practice talking to my wife, my friend, my brother in a way that might be more conducive to what I want out of that interaction. Because it's like people who say, calm down! That doesn't really calm people down. As a general rule, I don't feel calmer having done it.
What if you yell while you're choking them? Is that?
I don't think they're going to be calm either way. But if you, Mandela's off camera, like, what are they doing? But if you don't use the right rate, tone, pitch, and volume in combination with all that other stuff, you're not going to get the desired outcome. and you won't build the desired relationship.
Right.
And that to me is the biggest part. You are an instructor who works with kids. You have to constantly be adjusting. And it probably is tiring at the end of a day where you're like, oh my.
What'd you say you caught me blinking myself awake?
Oh yeah, blinking yourself, doing that slight, oh yeah, I'm all right, I'm here.
Shaking it out.
But that's all part of this. And the great thing is, for us, we already have all of this hardware ingrained. We're very, very complicated organisms. And the better that we can adjust the code that we use for a particular context, the better that we can maneuver through those contexts. So if I'm with my best friends and one of them makes me a drink and hands it to me, I'm probably gonna drink it because I trust them. If I'm outside on a street corner in New Orleans and somebody's mixing something and hands it to me, I'm probably not. And so all of that adjustment for context is a big part of that code switching and recognizing the context you're in. And it's interesting because code switching also determines what we even notice. Yeah. What are you paying attention to? Why are you paying attention to it? How does it fit into the larger narrative of whatever you're doing in this place?
I think of to the idea of practice.
Yeah.
The expression of like, once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't unsee. Mm-hmm. So, the lesson of affordance is, I hope when we talk to people about like, well, anything can be used as a weapon if it's held the right way. Mm-hmm. I hope on some level people walk out of the class, don't forget that bit of information, and take it a little bit into their everyday environment.
Absolutely.
With the idea of code switching, once you, I hope, have the concept unveiled to you, mm-hmm. you automatically start practicing it whether you know it or not, because you're going to be more aware of, I was talking to this stranger at Home Depot, and then I was talking to my significant other, and I changed a little bit. How did I change? What did that sound like externally? If you can try to like externally perceive yourself, which is difficult, but I think we can practice, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a way that we get, whether we like it or not, once you've seen how the sausage is made, it's really hard to unsee.
Yeah.
And you now start thinking about the component parts of how do I present, clothing is a costume, right? And once you start realizing that, you're like, oh, I'm doing this on purpose. Mm-hmm. What am I telling the world?
Absolutely.
My volume. I joke that once I learned how to control my volume at Sensei level, I actually suddenly had a hard time regulating at the somewhere between conversational across the table and then conversational more intimate.
Yeah.
I suddenly went from conversational to whisper, and I didn't have that in between zone. I'd lost it in doing this. Where in the past, this was teaching, yelling, projecting was really hard for me when I first learned it because I was a very shy person. But once I dialed it up, it took me a little while to remember how to dial it back down.
And that's hard. Like at one point I was at a seminar and we're doing teach backs, and I'm doing a teach back, and I did a teach back for alternative high school students, not for martial arts students. And so my assertiveness level was on like 10. Because if you're working with young people who are phone addicted, you got to get them engaged. You got to use a level of projection that's just very different.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out how to walk it back. And that's part of the practice. But the biggest part is also, aside from noticing it in yourself, is noticing it when other people's codes switch. When you switch in their minds from, okay, so we're talking about self-protection. So we'll use predatory engagements, right? And the definition of a bad guy for me is anybody who's using violence or coercion irresponsibly or maliciously. So being able to recognize when the person who is just a person at the party sees that your girlfriend or whoever is a little bit drunk and their codes switch. And if you know how to watch people, you can see when the body language shifts, and then suddenly the person that they've observed being drunk goes from just random person in a party to potential interest for them to take advantage of. And if you start paying attention to when your codes switch, when you recognize that when you talk to some people, you stand fully upright, and some people you start to kind of do this, if you recognize it in you can recognize it in other people more easily. And that will tell you before you even get to a point where your jujitsu matters, you'll be able to see, oh no, okay, so this person has misunderstood this situation. It is time for me to either exit stage left or for me to code switch into the assertive version of myself, the version of myself that deals with potentially hazardous people in a place that I can't just walk out of.
Yeah.
And makes it clear that, I call it the bad meal projection. I need to code switch into my bad meal version that is comfortable being assertive, that has strong body language, that maintains certain levels of distance and space. So if I'm in bad meal mode, Paul's too close to me because he's got long arms, and I'm not going to be this close.
We're both tall people. So.
Granted, yeah. But also I don't have a chair that I can really quickly get out of as easily. Yeah. So I'm gonna make all of those adjustments, and it's not about identifying the individual adjustments per se, as it is recognizing the situation and the appropriate version of yourself for it, which is probably a lot of gobbledygook to those of you guys who are watching. But don't worry, the easiest way to think about it is this. Think about the different versions of yourself when you were talking to your mom, when you were in trouble and when you weren't. Hopefully, those were completely different people, right? And so it's the same thing when you're dealing with people who are either unknown contacts or when you're dealing with people who are peripheral to your social circle.
Yep.
And you just recognize, you know what? This person gave me that extra, that handshake was held just a little too long. Right. They're standing just a little too close. And I'm taking all this information in and recognizing that there may be a problem.
So some of it is hardwired in our codex, right? Just
Absolutely.
as humans, right?
Absolutely.
Cultural matters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been to Italy, and the proxemics there are
completely different,
way closer than the United States. The volume level, the comfort with physical touch is way more than your average American. And I remember being 19, had done none of this personal protection type conversation, but I had to okay, relax, you're not an American anymore, right? You have to kind of change. I didn't know what word to call it, but I recognized I had to kind of change how I perceived and how I interacted with people because this was their world, not mine.
Absolutely.
We were, without specifics, we were talking about we're in Massachusetts, you'd moved back to Massachusetts from where you were previously, and specifically I think it was people's comfort level with being rude here was significantly higher because the penalty for being rude where you previously were was much more real.
Yeah, it was so
less esoteric, more specific.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm in Massachusetts and I realized so people will really actually walk into you and not say a thing.
And not apologize.
Not acknowledge you, just keep it moving. I was like, And it was one of those, it was almost like that armed society, polite society thing.
It is very much, I know sometimes there's a good lesson in the extremes.
Yeah.
And it's a thing. If I'm carrying certain tools, I recognize that the penalty for fucking up, try not to swear, but that's my not swearing. I grew up in Boston, kids.
It is what it is.
There's going to be at least one per episode. But the penalty, if I'm carrying certain tools, is much more extreme than if I'm not. So maybe, depending upon who you are and what the situation is, you run your mouth a little bit more egregiously because you're not afraid of repercussions going that severe.
And I think that's part of it. For me, being armed, not that I would ever be armed, but for me being armed,
there's two of them.
I think. For me being armed is much more about your mindset. And so even if we took the tools out of the equation, people in previous places that I've been have been much more careful about how they interacted with other people because they knew where it could go. They knew that this minor interaction could escalate to, even if it just escalates to fisticuffs, that's not where it ends. So we start getting into aftermath. Okay, cool. Now I know the next time I come to this environment where I had this fight, if the fisticuffs don't turn into anything significant on the legal side or on the practical side, even if nothing happens in the immediate future, the next time I come down here, I have to be aware of the fact that that guy I punched in the face might be around here too because we both frequent these areas.
And maybe with friends.
Maybe with friends, maybe with tools, maybe with both. And so now I have to, and so that type of calculus doesn't quite occur in the same ways in some of the places I've been around here, which is cool because for me, I had to basically like reassess, okay, what is appropriate for this engagement? What is appropriate for this environment? And which version of myself do I need to be?
So you're adjusting on the fly.
I'm adjusting on the fly and I'm realizing, okay, you know what? I don't need to assert my dominance on this sidewalk. If you need to, if I need to step out of the way to let you have the sidewalk, bro, you got the sidewalk. Enjoy it. I hope you like it. Because here, the level of sort of silly conversation that would have to happen to be like, excuse me, could you not just bump into me and not say anything? It's just not even worth it. And so this is part of my code switching, is code switching from places where if somebody bumped into you, it was because either they were completely oblivious on the basis of maybe some chemical assistance, or they were trying.
They were delivering a message.
They're trying to send you a message or trying to incite you to do something because this is a trap.
Right.
So adjusting from that to, hey, these people just aren't really thinking about you, you don't matter that much, and high-speed orthodontics is not part of their culture. Fair enough. Salute to you, do your thing, and making that adjustment and switching that code and recognizing what bucket I fit into for them. Because usually, you know, you just think like physics. I'm slightly larger than the average person. You're going to be at least cognizant that in order to be cognizant, you have to actually be looking in the direction you're walking.
Yeah.
And so just adjusting to that, which is, you know, it's a great thing to practice also, because what you'll find, at least for me, or what I found, is occasionally you'll discover broken codes, things that don't work for that environment.
Yeah.
Things that you default to for whatever reason. Maybe you talk to your shrink and figure out what the reason is, but things that you default to that don't really work for you and that don't serve the goal that you have for that environment. What?
This might be a wicked long dovetail. Maybe we'll try to keep it really short.
Yeah.
There might be an interesting paradigm for people to consider when certain people have a certain code for you, and you are 5 years removed from who you used to be. So we're talking about going back to old environments, old family, old whatever, and you're not that same person anymore, but they don't have the ability to mature, develop. You know, I'm sure we all have family members who still think we're 12.
Yeah.
And will continue to try to treat us like we're 12. And our code has changed, and I'm probably not willing to go back to being treated like I'm a 12-year-old.
Yep.
So you run into confrontation, not physical, but like...
No, you run into friction.
Yes.
And I think you're 100% right. There are... everybody fits into these buckets, right? For our perception. For all the individuality that we talk about. Generally, we put people into buckets because it would just be way too confusing if everybody was just completely undefinable. Anyway, so the thing that
This is what I like talking to you about, though. I think it's I'm in the middle of a very long week. I've been very excited for this.
Well, I'm glad to be here. It was so much fun. Paul's class reminded me how old and out of shape I am. But it's fascinating because a lot of times it might not even be old codes. It might be that you present a particular way to this person and you don't realize you present that way. So a lot of the miscommunications around something as controversial now, I guess, as flirting.
Yep.
What's flirting? How do we know?
Yeah.
And what are you presenting intentionally? What are they reading? And it might be old code in terms of cultural code. It might be that back in the day, you know, if you shook hands with a person of the opposite sex, when you held on to their hand, that meant something.
Right.
It might just be that person's trying to have an assertive handshake now, but my code was written in 1994, and so maybe I haven't quite caught up with the time. And so figuring out how to navigate those interactions in a way that allows you to get what you want requires you recognizing how other people are perceiving you and switching codes to something that's going to be effective for getting what you want out of that situation. Maybe you leverage still being 12.
Yeah.
And you excuse yourself from the table and you get to leave 2 hours early because you're a kid, right? You don't have to stay.
Purposeful pigeonholing.
Precisely. And Maybe you don't. Maybe you try to change their perception. But notice that one of the core fundamental tenets that we have kind of been talking around is knowing what you want.
Yeah.
Knowing what you want out of this situation. And to bring it back to self-protection, you want to get out with minimal damage to everybody involved. Which means if you are able to recognize when the predator is engaged in the interview and when they switch from I'm treating this person as a potential victim to I'm treating this person as a target, or I'm treating this person as just a general individual in the environment that I'm still reading. If you're able to recognize that early, you're able to make your adjustments and adjust for the basis of getting out of there, which might mean presenting yourself as a worse meal because you're big and you're strong and you're capable and you have all these things, or it might be presenting yourself as less interesting to whatever their focus is. Now, that's going to depend on your ability to recognize it, but when you take it out of the stranger danger thing, when it's the office creep, you actually probably can have a decent level of intel on that person, and you're going to interact with them a couple of times. So you might be able to read what it is they're trying to focus in on and just shift yourself away from it. Now, to be clear, am I suggesting that you should change yourself for other people? Kinda.
Depends on what you want.
Depends on what you want.
Right.
Now, if you just want to be you all the time, good luck, because
it all has consequences.
It all has consequences.
Right.
That you want and that you don't want. Right? I don't want Rory to be positive and negative, whatever. It all has consequences that you enjoy and that you don't enjoy.
Rory's not even here. We're still trying to appease Rory.
Yeah, I know, right? Sorry, Dad. But it all has outcomes. And if you are able to chart out those potential outcomes and be who you need to be in that moment, plastic mind.
Plastic mind is one of my favorite drills for a reason. Because it gives you permission to play with this at a tactical level, a physical level, tactile level, and role play at the same time.
Absolutely.
That's super fun. I was listening to a podcast not that long ago, and the guy talked about we all get to decide, is the goal more important or the relationship? So
Absolutely.
If I'm there to go buy a coffee from you, the only thing that matters is not really, we might be polite in our relationship, but really I'm there for the goal of my coffee. If I'm in an argument with my significant other, I might want to dial down what I consider to be the importance of my goal because the sustainability of the relationship might be the thing that matters the most. And how you play those roles, I think are going to be, I hope, consciously chosen, but maybe not, depending on who the person is and how self-aware they are, right? Self-awareness is certainly what challenge I think we find. We're biased, but we find for lots of people. Not in a bad way, but just like people roll through their life very happy and don't have to... One of my students like to say, thinking about thinking. And this is, we are cursed with this, and especially we get together and we like to do this on purpose. We do a lot of thinking about thinking.
Metacognition.
It's awesome and exhausting and exciting and challenging and frustrating and all of the above.
And it's an endless challenge. And that's really the difficulty of working on the social dynamic, social engineering side of self-protection is there is no there. Because the craziest part is what worked for me at 35 or at 25 or at 15 doesn't work at 50. And so now I'm gonna have to evolve my sense of others, my sense of the world, my sense of myself, and evolve the code for these interactions effectively so that I'm not walking around like I can just bounce back up from getting into some sort of ridiculous interaction, either practically or legally. Because it means something completely different when the cop shows up and you're an older guy with all these resources and you have this record of being a jerk for this number of years. You might decide that you might run into that one time where the cop takes it seriously and the judge takes it seriously. And now the things that you had to lose that you didn't have at 25. Congratulations. That pension, not for you. And I think that's part of this discussion, and this is part of what can make it hard but also makes it fun, because this has limitless application. If you can more effectively deal with other humans based on what you want from that interaction or that relationship, there's really no downside to that. And on top of it, if you can make it more automatic where you don't even have to sit there and think, okay, stand up straight. And
Yeah.
you can really dig it into a deeper part of yourself. You're going to obviously avoid not all of it, but you're going to avoid a decent amount of the predatory stuff. But you're also just going to have richer interactions. One of the biggest code switches for me has been being friendlier.
Yeah.
I didn't start smiling in pictures till I was probably 25 or 26 because I didn't think you were supposed to. Everybody, when we took pictures, you did the chin up. It looked like a mugshot.
Or a wrestling photo.
Oh, really? And so I didn't think you were supposed to. It's those tiny little stupid stuff like being genuinely interested and mildly glad when you met new people, at least initially, in socially and strategically safe contexts, made a huge difference. People went from thinking, there were people who I had never spoken a word to who thought I hated them. I was like, how would I hate you? What?
The first time we played at Tammy's in DC,
Yeah.
I don't always let Roy had already mentioned who I was to the group.
Yeah.
And I'm no one special, I just knew jiu-jitsu. And you and I played one set for the first time, and your interact with me changed dramatically from before and after. Like, it's like, I remember at one point, you go, did I just hand my fingers to the jiu-jitsu guy? There's a specific point I remember. But afterwards, it was like, okay, I was like, oh, I passed Malcom's test. He's talking to me more. And I was like, I can play. I immediately checked a box somewhere in the back of your head. I don't know if it was on purpose or not.
It was not. It was, well, I mean, that was years ago, but
Yeah.
it was, and it's weird because it's one of those things I wasn't aware of at the time.
Yeah.
I wasn't, and I'm sure I did it to everybody. Once I was like, oh, okay, so you know how to, all right, cool.
I can play a little bit.
Yeah, all right. It was almost like, it's terrible how this sounds, but like, oh, all right, so this is somebody fun to play with. All right, cool, that's dope. It's like going down, you're running down the stairs on Christmas morning, you open up it's a Tonka truck. Yeah.
That is the weirdest analogy I've been attached to.
But it's interesting too because those micro expressions combined with that shift in mentality that leads to the code switch, we're gonna do either way.
Right.
So you can either be conscious, careful, and purposeful, or you can just let it play out how you want to. And let all of the biases that you think no one knows you have show all over your face. And all of the things that you don't know and all the stuff that makes you uncomfortable and weirds you out, you can present it, or you can choose to be a little bit more.
We just reached a fork in the road, and I just made a tactical decision. We were supposed to record a second episode, but I'm instead going to ask Malcom a question dovetailing off of this, which is going to go another 10 minutes, which means we won't be able to record a second episode, and it's going to make this one 2 parts.